Welcome to Guide to IELTS. This is the reading passage 1, that is section 1 taken from test 1 of Cambridge IELTS Book 16. The first thing we do is read the heading and the subheading if there is one. In this case, the heading says, Why we need to protect polar bears, and there is no subheading. Next, I look at the question types. I do not read the questions at this stage. There are two question types. First is true, false, not given, and the second is fill in the blanks or complete the information. The answers to both these question types are usually in sequence. This information is something which will help me find the answers. I also make a note of the heading given to complete the information questions. This heading can help me find the location of these answers. Next, I try to get a gist of what the passage is about. There are different ways of doing this, but my preferred way is to read the beginning and ending of each paragraph. So let's start. Polar bears are being increasingly threatened by the effects of climate change. I'm going to stop here. Now to the ending of this paragraph. Yet, the polar bear experiences no such consequences. This sentence doesn't make much sense. So what I do is I just try to read what is right before this. Diabetes, heart disease, obese. So from here itself, I'm getting an idea that it has something to do with the size and weight of polar bears. So I know it starts with climate change and the paragraph ends with something about the comparison between humans and polar bears with regards to these diseases. When we read the beginning and ending of a paragraph, it may not always make complete sense. Get an idea of what is being talked about, use a little imagination, but don't go into the details of what is there in the paragraph. We should ideally not read the whole passage. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that the first paragraph is usually some kind of an introduction and the last paragraph some kind of a conclusion. So the actual main information of the passage may start only from the second paragraph. We start with the second paragraph now. A study by someone sheds light on this mystery. What is a mystery we're talking about here? What is mentioned in the ending of the previous paragraph? That is why polar bears do not suffer from diseases such as diabetes or heart disease. Another thing you may have noticed is that I skipped these names. I just said someone. So when I'm just trying to get the gist of a passage, I try my best not to read any of the proper nouns, whether it's name of a person or a place or an institute, because they would distract me from the actual meaning of the passage, and they are important only if they are part of a question. Now towards the end, polar bears may therefore be an important study model to understand heart disease in humans. Now here is something interesting I've realized just by reading the beginning and ending of two paragraphs. When I read the heading of this passage, Why we need to protect polar bears, I was expecting this passage to be about ecological balance, about environment, about why we should protect endangered species from extinction. But here, it seems to be all about how polar bears can help us understand human diseases. On to the third paragraph now. The genome of the polar bear may also provide the solution for another condition, osteoporosis. Again, there's a comma. This is some add-on information. I try my best to use the punctuation marks to my benefit. So this part I'm skipping. If you already know what osteoporosis is, this really helps you. If you know what genome is, it really helps you. Osteoporosis is a disease related to weakening of bones. Usually people in old age get it. The word genome has to do with the genetics, the genes. The more you practice these passages, the better you'd get at understanding at least some of these words. However, when you are practicing these tests for the first time, don't immediately go and look for meanings of words, because you need to get into the practice of finding answers even if you don't understand every single word. And you need to get into the practice of understanding words either from context or from similar words. In this case, gene has been mentioned before, and genome seems to be connected to genes from spelling, from pronunciation. Towards the end of the third paragraph now, despite this, their bones remain strong and dense. Once again, it's not very clear just from this sentence what it means, but it is some kind of a comparison, something that is happening to polar bears, but their bones don't weaken as a result of it. The fourth paragraph now. Psychologists and I'm going to skip these names. We're talking about two psychologists here. Psychologists found an explanation for this paradox in 2008. Again, a word you may not know the meaning of. Paradox refers to when we're talking about two things which are contradicting each other. For example, this quotation, "If I know one thing, it's that I know nothing." This is a paradox. So coming back to our passage, the paradox is about something happening to polar bears, which usually should lead to weakening of bones, but the bones do not weaken. I'm making a few assumptions just by reading the beginning and ending, but I'm consciously not going into the details of each paragraph. That will take too much time. The ending of the fourth paragraph now. If the mechanism of bone remodeling in polar bears can be understood, many bedridden humans and even astronauts can potentially benefit. So this is basically saying if we can understand how the body of polar bears work, how their bones remain so strong, we would be able to help humans as well. Fifth paragraph now. The medical benefits of polar bear for humanity certainly have their importance in our conservation efforts, but these should not be the only factors. So this paragraph, I'm assuming, is now going to talk about why we need to protect polar bears in addition to the fact that they can help us medically. Ending of this paragraph. A calculated move by a male bear involved running and jumping onto barrels in an attempt to get a photographer standing on a platform 4 meters high. It's something about some photographer trying to click a picture and a male bear jumping high. I'm not very sure about what this is talking about, but I'll leave it at that. I'll move on to the next paragraph, the sixth paragraph now. In other studies, such as one by, again the name and the year is not important, polar bears showed deliberate and focused manipulation. Ending. These examples suggest bears have greater creativity and problem-solving abilities than previously thought. So these two paragraphs are talking about different abilities of polar bears, I assume. This one is talking about jumping or maybe their understanding power. This is talking about their creativity. The seventh paragraph now. As for the emotions, while the evidence is once again anecdotal, many bears have been seen to hit out at ice and snow when they have just missed out on a kill. These punctuation marks are dashes. Any information that is between dashes is additional information. Even if we don't read this part, the sentence still makes sense. This is something that I've discussed in detail in another video about how to use punctuation marks and little details to read quickly. Anecdotes are basically stories that we tell which may not always be 100% true. They may be a little exaggerated. An anecdotal word comes from that, which means that it's just something that people have observed and commented about, but there is no proof of that. Ending of this paragraph. This is even more astonishing since polar bears are known to actively hunt humans in the wild. Again, clearly a lot is being talked about in this small paragraph because we start with the fact that they have emotions, and in the end we are talking about how sometimes it's been known that polar bears hunt humans. The last paragraph now. If climate change were to lead to their extinction, human medicine, but disappearance of intelligent, majestic animals. So just by reading the beginning and ending of each paragraph, I know that the first paragraph talks about climate change and the last paragraph talks about climate change too. I don't think it's mentioned anywhere else. At least I've not come across it. The second, third and fourth paragraphs talk about how polar bears can help us understand different diseases. These two paragraphs are about add-on reasons why we should protect polar bears. And this paragraph talks about emotions and feelings of polar bears. Understanding the structure of the passage, that is, which paragraph contains what information, can help us find the answers really quickly. We start with the first set of questions now, that is true, false, not given. One thing we know about true, false, not given is that the answers are usually in sequence. That is, wherever in the passage we find the first answer, the second would be after that, the third after that, and so on. So we just read the first one, identify the key information there, locate where the answer is, and then read that part properly. So here's the first question. Polar bears suffer from various health problems due to buildup of fat under their skin. The first 3 or 4 paragraphs are talking about different diseases and related issues. In the first paragraph itself, we have read about diabetes and heart disease. So we'll start from here only. So what we're looking for is whether polar bears suffer from health problems, and if they do, what is the reason for that? Is it because of the buildup of fat? So we start from the beginning. When we have certain information in mind, certain keywords and key information in mind, and we are looking for it in the passage, that is what we call the technique of scanning. So I'll just start scanning from the first paragraph itself. I have mention of the word fat here. I'm just going to start reading. One reason for this is that they have whatever amount of fat under their skin. Again, the numbers don't matter. So 11 centimeters of fat would matter if it is part of the question. Otherwise, it is some fat underneath their skin. Humans with comparative levels of adipose tissue, if you don't know the meaning, doesn't matter. Some tissue would be considered obese and would be likely to suffer from diabetes and heart disease. Yet, the polar bear experiences no such consequences. This is what tells me that polar bears do not have diabetes and heart disease because of the fat. So the answer to this is false. A statement is true if whole of it is true. A statement is false even if any part of it is false. So polar bears do have buildup of fat in their skin, but they do not have any health problems because of it. That is why this is false. The next question now. The study done by Liu and his colleagues compared different groups of polar bears. Whenever we have a name in any question, or if we have a date or a number, that immediately becomes our first key information, because that is what we are going to be looking for immediately. I have the name here. So I know the answer should be somewhere here. The name is mentioned again here, so it should be somewhere here. Now we're looking at their study and whether different groups of polar bears are compared in the study or not. So having found the place where the answer is going to be, I'm going to be looking for groups of polar bears, different classifications of it, different types of it. Again, I start scanning this particular paragraph. I'm starting from here now. This says they compared the genetic structure of polar bears with that of their closest relatives from a warmer climate, the brown bears. So brown bears are different types of bears. They are not polar bears. This allowed them to determine the genes that have allowed polar bears to survive. So when we are scanning, we may need to read some sentences. We may need to read most of the paragraph. What we do in this case is we start reading a sentence wherever we understand what it is talking about. And if we are sure that it doesn't have the information that we are looking for, we skip to the next sentence. So this allowed them to determine the genes that have allowed polar bears. It has nothing about different categories of polar bear. I start the next one. Liu and his colleagues found polar bears had a gene. Again, no. In humans, mutations of this gene are associated with something else. So the answer is again false, because there is a comparison between two types of bears, but they are not two types of polar bears. We start with the third question now. Liu and colleagues were the first researchers to compare polar bears and brown bears genetically. We already know that they did compare polar bears and brown bears. That we have already found when we were looking for the answer to the second one. We also know that the answer would be in the second paragraph only. What we need to find out is, did they compare them genetically? That is, did they compare the genes of the two types of bears? And were they the first one? These two are very important. If both are correct, the answer would be true. If any of them is incorrect, the answer would be false. And if any of them is not given, for example, if we are given that the comparison of genes was done, but we don't know whether they were the first one or not, then the answer would be not given. So coming here, they compared the genetic structure of polar bears with that of their closest relatives, brown bears. This allowed them to determine the genes that have allowed polar bears to survive in one of the toughest environments. And then after this, comparison or brown bears are not mentioned at all. This answer would be not given because this part, the first part, is not given. The fourth question. Polar bears are able to control their levels of bad cholesterol by genetic means. Because this bad is in inverted commas, this is the first thing I look for. So when we have any capitalized words, any proper nouns, we usually expect to find them as it is in the passage. Similarly, if there is a word which is in inverted commas, there are high chances of finding it as it is in the passage. And here it is, bad cholesterol. So I read the question again. Polar bears are able to control their levels by genetic means. What we are looking for is whether they are able to control or not, and if they are able to control, how? Is it because of their genes or not? We start from here. They found the polar bears had a gene known as whatever, which reduces the level of LDLs, a form of bad cholesterol. So are they able to control the level of bad cholesterol? Yes, they are, because they are able to reduce it. And are they able to do it through genetic means? Yes, they are able to do so because of a gene that they have. So the answer to this would be true. And this is where I had found the answer. The third I have not marked because it is not given. This part is not given. We start with the fifth one now. Female polar bears are able to survive for about 6 months without food. The first thing I'm going to look for is female polar bears. So I found a mention of females here. Female polar bears are mentioned here also. So this is where I'm expecting my answer. Female polar bears are able to survive for about 6 months without food. There are 2 points here, the duration and is it without food or not. So again we start looking here. Female polar bears undergo extreme conditions during every pregnancy. Once autumn comes around, these females will dig maternity dens in snow. So I'm going to skip this part from here to here because it has no mention of time period or of food. It does mention throughout the winter, but the time period is not mentioned. This process results in about 6 months of fasting. So yes, fasting means going without food. 6 months, the time period is mentioned, where the female bears have to keep themselves and their cubs alive, depleting their own calcium and calorie reserves. So are they able to survive 6 months without food? Yes, they are. About 6 months of fasting. And even after that, their bones remain strong and dense. So this is where my fifth answer is. The sixth question now. It was found that the bones of female polar bears were very weak when they came out of their dens in spring. We already have this. Despite this, their bones remain strong and dense. Even after 6 months of fasting, they have strong and dense bones. They do not have weak bones. So this is clearly false. The last question of this category now, the seventh one. The polar bear's mechanism for increasing bone density could also be used by people one day. From having read the beginning and ending of every paragraph, we know that the beginning 4-5 paragraphs are about studying polar bears to help humans find cure for their diseases. But I'll keep bone density in mind and see if I can find it. So, because I found the sixth answer here, the seventh should be after this. I start scanning the next paragraph, the fourth paragraph. Here's the word density. Density of their bones is bone density. So I'm going to start reading this one. They discovered that pregnant bears were able to increase the density of their bones before they started to build their dens. In addition, 6 months later, when they finally emerged from the den with their cubs. So this is about information, but can humans use this technique? So here it is. If the mechanism of bone remodeling in polar bears can be understood, that is what we are talking about. The mechanism of bone remodeling or mechanism of increasing bone density. Many bedridden humans and even astronauts could potentially benefit. So can we use it for people? Yes, we can. They can use it one day. They can potentially use it. Means the same thing. So this is where my seventh answer is. And the answer is true. Let's now start with the next set of questions. That is questions 8 to 13. In which we have to fill in these blanks. This question type falls under the category of complete the given information. Once again, just as with true, false, not given, we can expect the answers to be in sequence. A very important part of this question type is reading the instruction carefully. This says one word only, so our answer can only be a one-word answer. There's a heading given to this set of questions, and this heading can help locate where the answers could be in the passage. It says reasons why polar bears should be protected. Okay, so this is not too helpful because most of the passage is about this only. So we read the first question. People think of bears as unintelligent and dash. Now, just because I found my last true false not given answer here, the possibility of finding the other set of answers after this is more, but that is not necessarily so. It could be before also. However, when we read the beginning and ending of each paragraph, trying to get the gist of the whole passage, we did notice that till the fourth paragraph, it is all about how polar bears can help find cure for certain human diseases. So I think this information about bears being unintelligent should be after the diseases have been talked about. That is in the fifth paragraph or later. Now I can start looking for where it is mentioned that bears are considered to be unintelligent or stupid or something like that. However, I've just noticed the name of a zoo here. As I mentioned before, capitalized words should be your first go-to keywords. So since I have this zoo mentioned here, I look for this. So wherever I find this answer, that is the ninth answer, the eighth one should be before that. This is where the zoo is mentioned. So now I can start looking for unintelligent before this, and this answer should be near the zoo. The word intelligent is right here. I'm going to start reading. We tend to want to protect animals we think are intelligent and possess emotions. Bears, on the other hand, seem to be perceived as stupid, so we have found unintelligent, and in many cases violent. So people think of bears as unintelligent and violent. However, this may not be correct. For example, in Tenoji Zoo, a bear has been seen using a branch as a. So the zoo we have already found. We look for branch and then what the branch is used as. It's right here, the branch. The bear used a tree branch on multiple occasions to dislodge a piece of meat hung out of his reach. There doesn't seem to be an answer here, so I'll read the sentence before. A male bear called whatever in a zoo has even been observed making use of a tool to manipulate his environment. The answer is tool. The branch is used as a tool to dislodge the meat. Next, this allowed him to knock down something. So knock down means dislodge. This allowed him to knock down some meat. Now this says dislodge a piece of meat. So we can't write a piece of meat. And anyway, some is already mentioned. So some piece of meat would anyway be grammatically incorrect. And also we can only write a one-word answer. Next one. A wild polar bear worked out a method of reaching a platform where a dash was located. When we read the beginning and ending of each paragraph, we did read about some photographer being on a platform and something about it. But for now, the first key information I look for is a wild polar bear. And other words that I'll keep in mind is platform and method. So this is where I found my 10th answer. I'll start looking after this. So I'm just scanning for anything related to wild polar bears or platform, and here's a wild polar bear, found it, and actually a platform is mentioned here. So I'll read this. Problem solving ability has been witnessed in wild polar bears, although not as obviously. Skipping to the next sentence, a calculated move by a male bear involved running and jumping onto barrels in an attempt to get a photographer standing on a platform 4 meters high. So in the question we have a platform where a what or who was located, a photographer was located. That makes sense. So here the answer would be photographer. We did not find the word method or any of the common synonyms of the word method. What we do have here is a calculated move is something that is planned. So calculated move is the synonym for method here. Next one. Polar bears have displayed behavior such as conscious manipulation of objects and activities similar to a something. Because there is this article a here, I'm expecting a noun after this. There is such as here, so I'm expecting some kind of a mention of an example of something. So an example of some behavior which involves some manipulation of objects. I'll keep these things in mind as I start scanning the passage because there could be synonyms. Like for example, in the previous one, I had method in mind, I had platform in mind, I had wild polar bear in mind. 2 of them I found, 1 I didn't find at all. Anyway, so this is where the 11th answer was. We start looking for 12th after this. So we have found the word manipulation here. which is connected to this: conscious manipulation, deliberate manipulation, similar. For example, such as, so activity similar to something. Ames observed bears putting objects in piles and then knocking them over in what appeared to be a game. The answer is game. So activity we have not found, but what appeared to be is similar to. Next, bears may also display emotions. The next paragraph, the 7th one, has emotions in the beginning itself. They may make movements suggesting something if disappointed when hunting. Besides emotions and for example, so some kind of an example is given. My keywords are disappointed, hunting. So I'll start looking. So here's emotions. Missed out on a kill. On a kill would be the hunting part. So I'll read the question again. They may make movements suggesting something if disappointed. So it seems like it would be suggesting frustration if disappointed. Suggesting and seemingly out of are synonyms here. And here is frustration. And this is the end of it. Now let's observe where we found our answers. This is the beginning. Large parts of the first paragraph we didn't read at all. Large parts of the third paragraph we didn't read at all. 5th paragraph onwards, we found most of our answers in 5th and 6th paragraph. The 8th paragraph contains no answer at all. Another thing to be noticed is that there were certain words throughout which we found a little difficult. Words such as paradox here, anecdotal in the 7th paragraph, and quite a few others. But we actually didn't need any of those words to find the answers. To wind up, here's a list of some words and phrases that helped us find the answers. The first one is the last sentence of the first paragraph. Yet the polar bear experiences no such consequences. Yet has many meanings. Here it is used to mean however. And this sentence is very important when looking for the answer to the first question. The sentences before this one are talking about humans having problems because of fat deposition in their bodies. So they are talking about some problems because of fat deposition. And with just this one short sentence, it is conveyed that in contrast, polar bears do not have any such problems or any such consequences. This is the reason that the first answer is false. The 4th question says polar bears are able to control their levels of bad cholesterol. And in the passage, what we find is that they are able to reduce their levels of bad cholesterol. So in the answer 1, the understanding that reducing levels and controlling levels would mean the same is important. And second important thing is this dash. This punctuation mark just means that a form of bad cholesterol is add-on information about LDL. So what it is saying in the passage is that LDLs, which are a bad form of cholesterol. If we don't understand this part, we may think that polar bears are able to reduce levels of LDLs, which are something else. For the 5th one, without food in the question, fasting in the passage, to survive, to keep themselves and their cubs alive. The 6th question is pretty interesting. The question says it was found that the bones of female polar bears were very weak when they came out of their dens in spring. When they came out in spring is not mentioned in the passage at all. All that is mentioned is that females dig maternity dens and they remain there throughout the winter. And later 6 months of fasting is mentioned. So the 6th question specially requires an understanding of what is written in this part of the 3rd paragraph. We just have weak in the question, which is an antonym or an opposite of strong in the passage. And the word bones is there in both question and the passage. The 7th question, we do find the words mechanism and then density of their bones instead of bone density. But what we have in the question is, could also be used by people one day. And the same thing is written in the passage as, many humans could potentially benefit. And then here are some synonyms which helped find answers for questions 8 to 13. Be on a lookout for our next video in which we'll use this same passage to get ideas for our writings. That's it for now. Hope this helped you. Do like, share, and give feedback through comments. Subscribe to our channel. Help us reach a wider audience. All the very best.